Hello and welcome to episode 114 of Prose. This week, investigate the royal we and visit a German village spared by God from the plague for the price of a play. Please go follow the show on social media under @ProsePodcast across platforms. If you are enjoying the show, go click that 5-star review button in whatever podcast app you are using. It really does help me out a lot. For easiest access to the show, subscribe via that same podcast app that you are enjoying as we speak. And lastly, check out the Prose Patreon page on patreon.com/prosepodcast and consider supporting the show there. Gratitude and swag come from that deal. Thanks for listening. Let's get to the tale, shall we? This week, we have Majestic, Plural, and Oberammergau. Enjoy. Majestic, Plural. An original short story by Jared McGee. William had heard his father refer to himself as a plurality every day of his young life. The king, his royal majesty, sounded so fittingly regal when he did. When others referred to the king as a plurality, that made the monarch sound mythical and omnipresent, something akin to the multi-faced god. From time to time, some of the dukes or earls would use we instead of I, but that practice was dying out quickly. In fact, the king's advisors were pushing for him to make the use of such self-reference illegal in the kingdom. William's father had tried to explain the weight and importance of using that majestic plural, particularly in public situations and times of high ceremony. Supposedly, when the sovereigns spoke, they were not speaking for themselves, because there is no single solitary being that is a sovereign. Upon the gods lifting up a man or a woman to a throne, that person is imbued with the ability, capacity, and responsibility to speak for themselves, their royal bloodline, past and present, every citizen of their nation, and the voice of the God of that kingdom. That was a lot of voices coming from one mouth, hence the we. The exception to this was in the king's personal letters. He would write William little missives when traveling, and those were always chock full of first-person singular pronouns. Loads of I's, heaps of me's, bushels of my's. But this was because this was a man writing his son, not a god-king writing as a multi-dimensional being that sat the throne. These communications from the man, not the monarch, be they to William, William's now long-dead mother, may she rest in his bosom, or other monarchs with whom the king was friendly, were all rather different in tone, the majestic plural just being one aspect of that difference. The use by others toward the monarch was considered deferential at best, polite at middling, and a marker of someone willing to play by the rules at worst. The military men and women of the realm were the most religious when it came to seeing the new king as a divine ruler. They never failed to salute, stand at attention, speak only when spoken to or given leave to, and, upon being given that leave, they never failed to address the sovereign with the majestic plural. Deferential didn't cover what those in the military did in the face of their king. It really was something just shy of worship. Ministers used the practice, but they slipped often. Minor nobility used the practice, but grudgingly. The clergy used the practice, but only because they knew it helped their cause in spreading the light of the multi-faced God as the one true God. All of this divine right of rule morass made William's head spin. He loved his father. He respected his father. But it was difficult for him to reconcile the loving bear of a man that used to give him horsey rides on his broad back with the king appointed by the celestial to rule over the hearts, minds, bodies, and souls of the people. They didn't square for William, yet he knew they were the same person. William's tutors tried to help him reconcile these seemingly disparate people by using the multi-faced God and his many aspects and faces while being one singular God himself. These lessons were just as confusing. Theology, when one got into the weeds of it, was rather nonsensical, at least to William, so their lessons and analogies were lost on him. Part of William's problems with the theological argument was that the multi-faced God and a great many other gods from a great many other lands generally were referred to by the Majestic Plural, and the holy texts of those gods generally had the gods themselves using the Majestic Plural to refer to their person. The three-in-one God of the Northeast, for example, saw both Holy Writ and poetry written with use of the plural as singular. Never in the history of the written accounts of the Trinitous God were they referred to in the singular sense. The god-kings of the Far East were thought to be the gods given birth on this plane of existence. They called their kings Zhen, taking the only pronoun for self-reference for themselves and forcing the lower nobility to be known as Guarin, or lonely ones, to further demonstrate just how solitary and singular those lowly ones and their lives were in the kingdom. Their subjects, there in the far-flung east? Those serfs were Chen, meaning subject, or servant, or slave, depending on translation, or they were Zhuxia, below the foot, or they were Yu, simply the foolish. The mountain kings of the Middle Lands used the Majestic Plural too, but for them those plurals were used to reinforce the overt caste system present in those lands. One of higher station refers to oneself as the Majestic Plural when they address anyone of a lower station. Of course, the king is the highest of the high in that social running, so they are the ultimate lit, the plural pronoun, in their tongue. The desert kings use the royal we not for the royals, but only for the faceless God. They whom we cannot know. There in the sands of the world, only their spiritual life includes this practice. All of these deities and these monarchs arguing that they are the only God, they are the only divinely appointed sovereign? It rankled William and made him think that it was all just a mess of lies structured to ensure that the power structures of those states would not fail. He would never say all of that out loud, though. That was sedition. That was also against his family and his self-interest. Those types of declarations were treason. Those types of thoughts were kindling, just awaiting a spark to ignite a blaze that would not be put out with any ease. Other kings and queens had fallen to the people in history, or to the military, or to the priests. In the Annus Horribilis, only 100 years prior, the great mountain king Storablus IV saw his clergy rise up and topple him. The mountain stronghold fell. His daughter, Storibolia, took up arms and only after a decade of fighting eventually took the capital and the throne back into her own hands, becoming Storibolia I. That bloody civil war shook the foundations of the world and the foundations of every monarchy on the planet. So, William studied his father. He listened to his father. And now, draped in black velvet and silks and furs, wearing the sword of his father and his father's father, William stood at attention as the high priest made to bury his father in a barrow that made those of the kings of old look like paupers' graves. William fought back his tears, standing stiff as a board and stoic, hopefully looking fierce and regal and divine. He was not ready to lead this nation or these people. That much he was sure of. They were ready to lead this nation or these people, though. With their ancestors and multi-faced God, they would take up the mantle and the throne and drive this grand state until history saw fit to end their days. With all the people from across the kingdom channeled through them, they could not fail. They would not fail in this divine duty. Thank you for listening to Majestic, Plural, an original short story by me, Jared I. McGee. Please do stick around. We have another short story coming right up. This time, we're going to focus on a small German town and have a little bit of historical fiction / nonfiction. Let's call it creative historical nonfiction, where we look at something that really happened and put it through the lens of short story. Oberammergau, an original short story by Jared I. McGee. "5 hours, once every 10 years. 510 hours collectively, really, if the repeated performances from the last round are counted as a whole. That is a lot of passion and a lot of play. But one must keep to one's promises, and Oberammergau has a hefty promise to keep indeed. In fact, Oberammergau's promise to God is on the books to the day, though not the precise time. On October 28th, 1633, the residents of the mountain village pled with the Almighty to spare them any more death and disease amid a breakout of the plague in the wake of the 30 Years' War, that damnable conflict that was meant to settle questions of God's dominion on earth, but spiraled into two families working out their grievances by the proxy of hundreds of thousands of others' lives lost. Legend has it now, though, that Oberammergau began putting on a play of Jesus' life and death there in their humble village the year after God kept their compact, pulling back his plague from the small corner of Bavaria and allowing the residents of Oberammergau to live in peace while the rest of the world burned. When one makes such a deal with El Shaddai, one must not take half measures. So, though originally a bit more humble, the still living promise with God has come to include thousands. There is music, recitation, drama, and tableau. The script reaches back to the Hebrew texts and meanders its way to the resurrection of Christ himself. All the big names show up in the performance. Esther, Joseph, Moses, the Pharaoh, Aaron, all the disciples, Mary, Joseph, Mary Magdalene, Pontius Pilate, and so many more. Of course, Jesus is the star. Oberammergau did, admittedly, borrow heavily from the Holy Book itself and the Catholic celebrations of Easter, but they felt this could be forgiven for their divine purpose and the keeping of their celestial promise. Rather than only focusing on the life of Jesus, though, they chose to start at the very beginning, with creation and Adam and Eve's expulsion from the Garden of Eden. After all, that is where the seeds for the crucifixion and resurrection are laid, are they not? It only made sense to include the entire narrative arc when ensuring God's favor continues to be bestowed upon them and their town. Long ago, their play outgrew their village church. The parish once only held 100 or so faithful. Only 40 years into their promise, and the small facilities were outgrown. Many surrounding villages wanted to come to the divinely commissioned play, after all. So, the residents of Oberammergau further honored God's mercy by holding the Passion Play on the very graves of those that had died of the plague in the dark times before the compact. With each generation, the popularity of God's own theatrical production brought even more outsiders. An irony in the wake of travelers having once been the very ones to spread the plague across the world. With their divine charter and shield in place, Oberammergau did not flinch at the growth of the waves of visitors each successive decade. New structures and new places were built with each successive performance, updated with the latest in modern comforts and technologies. They host thousands upon thousands over those 510 hours. And they have no plans on backing down from that compact or constricting their exponential growth that has only been snowballing these 387 years. Modernity has not fully smiled upon God's commissioned work. Oberammergau's Passion Play is often marked as being a bit insensitive to the modern ear. More specifically, though the materials have been revised from time to time to keep up with a modern audience's shifting thoughts, loyalties, mores, and such, the play has been called anti-Semitic by a great many. Those great many point to Adolf Hitler's praise of the piece and its purported blaming of the Jews as murderers of Jesus as evidence enough that the play is problematic at best. Revision after revision has kept the play and the promise alive. even after the Nazi regime did indeed try to amend and take the reins of the play for propaganda purposes. The play resisted that devil's advances. The play survived, if not thrived. The play shifted its focus to be more inclusive, and it has reaped additional terrestrial rewards for that inclusion. As always, God works in the most mysterious of ways, and his ways cannot be fully understood by mankind. This is doubly true of direct compacts. One need only look at the ins and outs of his promises with Jacob, Job, Noah, Moses, David, and the like, if there is any doubt there. In regards to the contract between him and Oberammergau, he has gone further than simply keeping the plague from the streets of the village. He has ensured prosperity among its residents. Because they keep their promise to the Almighty, they have been blessed with money and notoriety, with plenty. Just as Jesus split loaves to feed the masses, so God himself chose to further honor the village for its dutiful celebration of his works, multiplying their successes and earthly winnings exponentially with each passing decade. From half of their residents dying way back in 1633 to the present of 2020, Oberammergau has not allowed their promise to be broken. They have, however, from time to time, had to delay their once-in-a-decade timeline. But God seems to forgive them that. Amid another plague, they have delayed their most recent performance in the now. So, God must now wait for 2022 before he sees his commissioned theatrical performance once again. Oberammergau will have to hope that they have not breached their compact with the Holy Father, and that he will keep the new plague at bay as they await the next opportunity to put on their act of submission and reverence. Thank you for listening to Oberammergau, an original piece of short creative nonfiction by me, Jared I. McGee. That does it for Prose this week. All sounds that you have heard throughout this episode have been taken from YouTube's free audio library, and they are being used under CC 01.0 public domain dedication licenses. As you continue about your week, please love those around you, tell them that you do, and embrace this life as it is, stranger than fiction. Thank you so much for listening. I'll see you again in 2 weeks' time.